Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to all respected participants of this short IIIT short course Introduction to Human Sciences. So I am going to continue with the lecture, and the topic this week is contributions of early Muslim scholars. So I am so sorry for the glitches that we faced today, but inshallah we will cover up the syllabus. Right, so practically this is my overview. I will be doing a recapping on the definition of psychology, and then I will be delivering lectures on the contribution of two major Muslim scholars, who is Ibn Sina and Al-Ghazali. So these Ibn Sina and Al-Ghazali's contribution to the context or the comprehension of soul of human being. Okay. Alright. So first of all, I would like to recap or do some kind of revision on psychology, definition of psychology. So what missing here is that with the common or mainstream mainstream psychology study, the definition of psychology goes as systematic understanding of human behavior and mental processes. So it seems to be the very nature of all the theories presented under this Western perspective of psychology practically look into observable matters. Right, look into observable matters in the mode of human behavior, and though mental processes, it happens inside of the human body, right? It is unobservable, but it is still able to be studied. We have certain machineries, for example, that can gauge into the electrical processes that happen in the brain, for example. So we are still able to understand those contexts of mental processes. But practically, what is prevalent in the study of psychology as of now, according to the mainstream discipline of psychology, is we study most of the time observable entities. There are unobservable entities that we study, such as mental processes, but it depends on the manifestation of those processes in terms of behavior. Right, so perhaps if we were to define it differently from the Islamic point of view, using the terminology of this can be the definition, right? Systematic understanding of human behavior, mental processes, and soul, right? Or systematic understanding of human behavior, mental processes, and soul from Quran and Sunnah. But what we want to sort of like emphasis here is an alternative definition coined in such a way, right? This can be still refuted and still refined. So we are talking about systematic study of the manifestation of the soul in the form of behaviors and mental processes. So that's what we are trying to sort of like incorporate, as opposed to the mainstream definition of definition of psychology that is commonly used by so many people now. Okay, so that is the context. So again, this is why we the action now is to rejuvenate the conception of soul, the understanding of the conception of soul in the discipline of psychology as per now, as the alternative perspective to the existing one. So in summary, we can look into this diagram. So this is psychology or human behavior, for example, or human being. So definitely we are affected by environmental factors, things around us, all right, things inside us, our own self, and things inside us, environmental factors. So we are trying to put into this context the comprehension and understanding of the entity of soul, right? So soul can directly contribute to the behavior of human behavior, human behavior, and so also can be the factors intervening, all right? Factors intervening between the environmental factors and definitely human being or human behavior. So this is very rough idea or rough diagram that we are proposing. Somehow it still need to be refined, and further research has to be done in order for us to really understand the accurate structure of how soul play its role in determining human behavior. All right. Okay. So here, the question is, what actually is the soul? So that's why we want to look into the contribution of the Muslim scholars with regards to the conception of souls. Right, so before we get into the contribution of the Muslim scholars, I'd like to sort of like recap. These are, psychology is considered as a scientific discipline. So when we label psychology as a scientific discipline somehow, so it follows through the science paradigm, the paradigm of science. Right, so we know that the paradigm of science, first of all, there should be an empirical evidences to whatever we say. And definitely there are step-by-step processes that we have to embark on while we do our research based on the scientific paradigm. So in psychology, based on the scientific paradigm, there are goals of psychology that usually we subscribe ourselves to. Right, so the first one is to describe. Right, the first one is to describe the phenomenon of a human being. How human being, who they are, the characteristic of human being, the personality, the attitude, so on and so forth. Right, so that is the first one. Right, and then it is also meant to describe the interaction between man and the cosmos and the human environmental factors. Right, that is the lowest level of the goals of psychology, modern psychology. Right, modern psychology. And then the next stage, a bit more advanced than just to describe, is to explain. So we want to explain rather than just describing man is as such, the interaction of man between man and the cosmos and the environment is as such, rather than just describing, we would like to explain. So when we explain, we give a certain justification why people behave in such a way. Right, so that is the second stage of the goal of modern psychology. And the third stage is to predict, knowing the common connection between man and the cosmos, and how the environmental factors it influence man, so we would be able to predict, right? To predict, knowing one's personality now in the future. With that kind of personality, will he or she able to be a good worker, for example, or a good student? So that is another level, right? So another level. So the highest level for modern psychology is the control. Right, to control the behavior. So that is actually the highest level of the modern psychology, or the goals of psychology, the goals of modern psychology, to control. All right. So we are looking into this context in terms of the science of the soul. When we want to rejuvenate the context of soul into the study or understanding of human behavior, we consider to control of behavior actually is the lowest level. All right, is the lowest level. To what extent should we control our behavior? All right, to the point that we are able to fulfill the role of ourselves as the abid and khalifa towards Allah, and then to control ourselves to be able to obtain Allah's redha. All right, so that is kind of a rough conception that we are trying to put out forward to all participants. Right, so to think over, this is actually the why we need to rejuvenate the conception or understanding of the soul into psychology. Okay, so we can see here, to describe, explain, predict, and control, those are the goals of psychology as subscribed by the modern psychology or the mainstream psychology as of now. And we would like to look into the aspects of controlling behavior as the lowest level, meaning that we have much advanced level, or much higher level after controlling, right? To subscribe ourselves to the oneness, where it takes more than just controlling our behavior, right? So that is the context, the whole thing. And now, let's look into Ibn Sina's contributions to the science of soul. All right. So Ibn Sina maintained a dualistic view of the body and soul. So it is saying here, Ibn Sina believed that the body and soul are distinct entities. Okay, distinct entities. The soul is not just a function or property of the body, but a separate, independent substance. Okay, so that is the context, dualistic view of the body. And I hope participants still remember, I draw the diagram of dualistic nature of human being, the material part and the immaterial part. Right, so that is very general ideas, some summary of what I want to deliberate here. Okay, so again, Ibn Sina actually maintained dualistic view of the nature, dualistic view of human being. Human being is composed of the material body and the immaterial soul. Right, so here he is saying that the soul is connected to the body and functions through it, but remains an independent substance. Okay, all right. And then the body, we look at the body as a medium through which the soul expresses itself into the physical world. All right, but then so we're talking about a body which is material medium, and then the soul which is immaterial medium. All right, immaterial medium. So the body actually is the vehicle by which the soul expresses itself in the physical world. But again, although the body is the vehicle, the soul maintains its characteristic, which is, or its true essence, which is non-material, and definitely has a lot of this capacity known as intellectual capacity. Okay, so the interaction is necessary for the soul's earthly existence, but once it gains sufficient knowledge and detaches from bodily desire, it ascends toward a purely intellectual existence, further emphasizing the soul's independence. So this is what meant by independent substance, the soul as an independent substance. So the interaction between the body and the soul is definitely required because of what? We exist in this earth, all right? So our earthly existence require this prominent interaction or pertinent interaction between the body and the soul, all right? But you know, once the soul gains sufficient knowledge and detaches itself from the vehicle, the material vehicle, the body, all right, it will be able to ascend towards a purely intellectual existence. So that captures the true essence of the soul, which is non-material and definitely intellectual. All right. So when it goes up to the intellectual level, that further emphasizes the soul's independent nature. All right. So that is the context of the conception of soul by Ibn Sina. So again, I would like to sort of like summarize. So the body will be serving as the medium or vehicle that enables the soul to express itself and carry out actions in the physical world. Right. So this means the soul's capabilities, like intellect and its willpower, all right, will be manifested through the bodily functions. Okay. Despite its connection to the body, the soul's true nature is non-material and purely intellectual. Right? It is not confined to physical properties, but exists beyond the material world. Right? So perhaps it's quite complex, but that is actually the true essence of the existence of the body, the material part of the vehicle to our human being. And then the very essence of the soul as non-material and practically intellectual. Okay. When I mention this interaction, the third point, this interaction is necessary for the soul earthly existence. This is actually indicative of the interaction between the material body and the immaterial soul. But once it gains sufficient knowledge and detaches from bodily desire, it ascends toward a purely intellectual existence, further emphasizing the soul independence. Okay, so if the soul is able to gain sufficient knowledge and detaches itself from the bodily desires and limitations, You know, sometimes I think we are all very much familiar when we are in our body. Actually, sometimes the body hindered us from looking right towards the truth. Right? They become some kind of veil. Right? They become some kind of veil to our own self. So once the soul gains sufficient knowledge and detaches itself from bodily desires and limitation, not detach itself from the material body, but from the bodily desires and limitation, it will be able to transcend toward a higher, purely intellectual existence. Alright, so this process is indicative of the soul's journey away from the material world. So that is the context. Okay. Alright, so here, summarizing the point, we can say that Ibn Sina ultimately highlights the context of independence of the soul. Right. So despite its temporary connection to the body, the soul's true essence remains unaffected and distinct, capable of reaching higher state once free. Right? Once it is free from any physical constraint. So that is the very nature or the essence of the soul when it comes to the word that is stated here, independent substance. Meaning that it can pave a way independently to achieve further or higher existence, all right, towards the pure subscription to God. Okay, now, Ibn Sina synthesized Neoplatonic and Aristotelian thought with Islamic theology to the understanding of the soul. Okay, so he sort of like combined Neoplatonism. So Neoplatonism emphasizes the idea of existence of a higher immaterial reality. So this is what Neoplatonic group of people stress on. The most pertinent point stressed or upheld by this Neoplatonic group. So they emphasize the existence of a higher immaterial reality. So what is Aristotelian philosophy? So Aristotelian philosophy focus on logical, empirical examination of the world. Right. So these two, Ibn Sina sort of like synthesize this Neoplatonic and Aristotelian paradigm or thought with Islamic psychology. So this synthesis allowed him to develop a unique view of the soul that harmonized Greek philosophical traditions with Islamic metaphysical principles. Okay, so this is the context, all right, that we should understand it. Soul is considered as immaterial, indivisible substance, distinct from the body, drawing from both Aristotle and Neoplatonism. Right. So unlike material entities, Ibn Sina argued that the soul is self-subsistent. Right. And I think I did describe how independent it is. Right. So the word self-subsistent is another word that can use to describe it, meaning that it does not rely on the body for its ultimate existence, right? For its ultimate existence. Okay, so in other words, Ibn Sina argued that the soul is an immaterial. Immaterial here means non-physical and indivisible. Indivisible here means it cannot be broken down into parts. Right, so this means that unlike physical objects, which are made of divisible components, the soul is a unified, non-material entity that exists independently of the body. Okay? So before I get into the slides, I would like to sort of like deliberate a bit more. With regards to the word here, unlike material entities, Ibn Sina argued that the soul is self-subsistent, meaning it does not rely on the body for its existence. So here, in other words, we are saying that the soul is distinct from the body. Right, so Ibn Sina stressed that the soul is distinct from the body. So this idea also came from both Aristotle's concept of the soul being the form of the body but not identical to it, and Neoplatonic thought, which emphasized the soul's higher immaterial nature. So Neoplatonic group of people, they are thinking, or they are using this paradigm, saying that the soul has a higher, the soul is its particular nature, it has a higher immaterial nature, right? It has a higher immaterial nature. So although the soul is connected to the body and functions through the body, they remain fundamentally different entities. Okay? Right, so with this word, self-subsistent, right, so it means it does not depend on the body for its existence. While the soul interacts with the body to express itself in the physical world, right, it is not reliant on the body for its own being. So this is actually a key distinction between material entities which depend on external factors, for example, the body needing foods, and the soul which is independent of such needs. Okay, so that's the very nature of soul and the material body being described by Ibn Sina. Okay, Ibn Sina also argued that the soul is immaterial and conscious independently of sensory experience. Alright, independently of sensory experience. When it is being described as immaterial, right, it means that it is not made of any physical matters. When it is described as conscious on its own, it is existent, it can exist without needing sensory inputs from the body, right? So this idea challenges the view that consciousness is a product of the brain or physical senses, right? Okay, so according to Ibn Sina, soul can exist and function in a purely non-material state. Right, so it is able to even perceive reality without needing to rely on physical organs or sensory experiences. So that's the explication of the point on this slide. Okay, Ibn Sina argues the soul as immaterial and conscious and independently of sensory experiences. Okay. Here, just now I mentioned about the word consciousness, right? Similarly, the word self-awareness. Self-awareness is actually a fundamental and inherent quality of the soul by its very nature, meaning that the soul possesses this particular characteristic. It is aware of itself without having to depend on any external factors or stimuli. Okay. So the soul is capable of understanding and perceiving its own existence independently and does not depend on the physical body. Okay, so I would like to repeat this point, awareness of itself. Okay, so Ibn Sina maintained that self-awareness is essential and an inherent quality of the soul, right? So this means by its very nature, by the soul's very nature, the soul is aware of its own existence without requiring any external stimuli or input. So this is definitely unlike the body, right? So the body depends on sensory information for our body to function. Definitely we have to depend on the use of our sensory organs. When we use our sensory organs, we get to be in the process of sensing our world, the world around us. And then based on the sensation processes that we are involved in the process of perception, for example. And everything actually, the body needs to function in that way, physical way of functioning. Okay? This is actually an example being given. Ibn Sina's famous thought experiment, the flying man. So perhaps participants later on can sort of like find more information about this experiment Flying Man, just to get to understand about this whole context of the independency of the soul, and definitely the soul owning the capacity of being aware of its very essence. Okay. So with regards to how Aristotle influenced the conception of soul by Ibn Sina, practically Ibn Sina categorized the soul into three parts: rational soul, animal soul, and vegetative soul. Okay. So these are the deliberation of the different types of categories of soul as being labeled by Ibn Sina. So vegetative soul, right? So this is the nature of vegetative soul. It is responsible for basic biological functions such as growth and reproduction, shared by animals, plants, animals, and human. Whereas the animal souls, this is actually the part of soul that governs the sensory perception and movement, common to both animals and human. And rational soul, this is the one faculty which is unique to human being. Right, this component is definitely responsible for the intellect, reasoning, and abstract thought capacities of human being. Okay, so this is what makes us different from other living entities. So each level represents a hierarchy in the soul's capacity, with the rational soul as the highest and capable of knowing universal truth. Right, knowing universal truth. So it seems to be that the conception of vegetative soul is the lowest level, the animal is the second level, and the highest is actually the rational soul. Okay, so further deliberation of the rational soul. So we want to look into the rational soul and get to know its faculty, the faculty of rational soul. Right, so Ibn Sina proposed that the human intellect, right? So we're talking about human intellect now. So human intellect is a function of the faculty of the rational soul, right? So the rational soul is the highest, higher aspects of human being that is responsible for the aspects of reasoning, the capacity of man's capacity of reasoning and man's capacity of intellectual activity. So according to Ibn Sina, it is through this rational faculty that humans are capable of higher thought and reasoning processes. Okay? So in this context, he introduced the term of active intellect. So active intellect is an external the concept of active intellect is a concept indicating that it is indicating an external universal source of knowledge. Okay, so the active intellect serves as a source of universal knowledge, which individual access through intellectual abstraction. Okay. In other words, this active intellect is seen as the repository, okay, repository of universal knowledge, meaning that these active intellects contain all possible forms and truth about reality. So it contains all of those things, all possible forms of truth, all possible forms and truth about realities. So the individual intellect will tap into this external source to obtain intellectual and abstract knowledge. Okay? The human intellect on its own cannot create knowledge, but can receive it from the active intellect through a specific process. Okay? The process is known as the intellectual abstraction. So what is intellectual abstraction? So it refers to the process by which the mind or intellect isolates and focuses on the general essence or concept of something by ignoring its specific concrete details. Okay, let me give you an example. when we are thinking about a tree, let's say when we're thinking about a tree, so the intellect abstracts the universal idea of a tree from the individual characteristic of a specific tree, such as their shape, their size, or color. Right. So the intellect will be focusing on the essential, unchanging nature of the object, which is the tree. Right. So tree, for example, we can have like different types of trees, different shapes of trees, different types of tree leaves. For example, most of the time, the leaves of trees is green, for example. But distinctly we can find leaves of a tree that is red in color. For example, the Japanese maple, for example, right? Or even the maple tree. Their leaves are actually red in color. But then when we are using this intellectual abstraction, the intellectual abstraction capacity will be pointing up to the unchanging or common characteristic of a tree. Right, so that's how we function. Okay, so the intellect focuses on this intellectual abstraction will be focusing on the essential unchanging nature of the object, ignoring the individual variation that may exist in the material world. Right, so most of the time we'll be looking into the trees and the leaves will definitely be red, but we do accept the fact that there are a very distinct type of trees that perhaps may have different colors of the leaf. Rather than red, rather than green, it's something else. Right? Most of the time, red, for example. Okay, so that is how we sort of like understand the whole conception of our cosmos. So here, for Ibn Sina, the soul achieves knowledge by receiving forms from the active intellect, a process that bridges human reason with the divine knowledge. Right? With the divine knowledge. Okay, in other words, Ibn Sina believed that the soul acquires knowledge by receiving forms from the active intellect. These forms are not physical shapes, but rather universal concepts or ideas that represent the essence of certain things, just like the tree just now. So the essence of the tree, its trunk is upright, for example, and the root actually will be permeating itself under the earth, for example, and then the branches will be branching out, and then the leaves actually will be found at the end of the branches, for example. So that is actually the universal concepts, right? And these universal concepts will be the essence that represent the genre of a tree, for example. Okay, so the interaction between human reason and the active intellect is what allows the soul to bridge human understanding with divine or universal knowledge. Right. So this process of receiving forms is how human beings move beyond the sensory experience and attain higher abstract knowledge of reality. So we have like some kind of schema in ourselves, all right, based on this universal knowledge, source of universal knowledge, and this universal source of universal knowledge is being accessed by human beings via the process of intellectual abstraction, whereby we will look into the general essence or schema, basic concept or basic schema of something while ignoring its specific concrete details. So we will get to know that the moment a word tree is mentioned, so we can get into the very essence of the genre of a tree. For example, the upright trunk, the roots that will be permeating under the earth, for example, and then the branches, the leaves, the very common essence of the word tree, for example. But then we do understand the fact that there are variations to this general essence. Okay, so that's how we get to understand about our cosmos, and that is also the way we are able to bridge, all right, our human reasoning, our own reasoning, human reasoning, with that of the divine knowledge, right? Because divine knowledge most of the time it exists in a metaphysical form, all right, and then you understand the very general essence of it, and then you'll get to understand the whole bulk of the divine reality. Okay, so that is the contribution of Ibn Sina, right? Ibn Sina. Now we will move into Al-Ghazali. I'm so sorry because there are a little bit more on the Al-Ghazali. Okay, so now again Al-Ghazali also mentioned about the dual nature of human being. He posited, or he sort of like identified that humans comprise both physical and spiritual dimension. So the word used here is physical dimension, which is material dimension of man, similar to that of Ibn Sina, and the spiritual dimension of man, similar to the immaterial soul described by Ibn Sina. Okay, so the physical dimension is the material body, which characteristic is very much temporary and definitely subject to decay. So that is the true material dimension or physical dimension of us man, right, human being. Whereas the spiritual dimension is represented by the word by soul, the word an-nafs, which is divine and which is immortal. All right, which is divine and which is immortal. So these are actually the characteristics of the soul as described by Al-Ghazali. Right. So according to Islamic theology as well as the thoughts of Al-Ghazali, right, the soul is a creation of Allah, definitely. And unlike the body, it is not subject to the physical law that governs the material body. So that is the distinction made by him on the soul as opposed to the body. Right, soul is a creation of Allah and is not bound by physical laws that govern the material world. Right, so that is the characteristic. While the body is bound by time, right, so definitely the body is bound by time, by space, and laws of nature. Right, what kind of laws of nature that govern our body? The law of aging, for example, the law of decay, for example. So the soul, on the other hand, is a non-material entity. So it exists beyond this limitation. It is not bound by space, it is not bound by the law of nature or even time. Right, it operates under a different set of spiritual law. Right, so that is actually the law that governs our soul, and this law, spiritual law, is governed by the divine principles rather than the physical or the natural ones. So that is the characteristic of soul. All right, the soul is eternal or immortal. Right, soul is eternal and does not cease to exist after the death of the physical, and does not cease to exist, meaning that it continues to exist. Right? It will continue to exist even after the death of the physical body. Right? So the word immortal, right? The word immortal carries on the meaning that the soul will continue to live beyond the material life of the body. So this view holds that while the body perishes and decays, the soul will remain intact and enters into a different phase of existence. All right? And the soul, again, it is accountable in the afterlife for its action in this world. Alright? Okay, the soul will be held accountable, and the accountability is actually a core part of the another world that we will venture in, right? The afterlife world. Alright, so each soul will face judgment by Allah based on its moral and spiritual conduct during the life. Right, so that is actually the basis of the deeds of the soul. So the soul deeds, whether good or bad, will determine its fate in the afterlife. So that is the description by Ghazali onto the nature of soul. Right. So the fate of the soul in the afterlife will depend on its moral and spiritual state at the time of the death. So if our soul lived righteously with strong faith and good actions, will be rewarded with eternal bliss in the paradise. Conversely, on the other hand, if the soul has accumulated sinful actions or lived in disbelief, right, so definitely it will face punishment, right? So the concept of heaven and hell, the concept of reinforcement as well as punishment. Right, so this understanding places a very great emphasis or pertinent emphasis on the moral and spiritual integrity in this life. Because of what? It will directly influence the soul's eternal destination. Okay, so on this point, Ghazali also stressed on he stressed on the importance of spiritual purification, because we are talking about the afterlife, and the soul will continue living into the face and will be responsible to accept its own deed, right? Whether being punished or being reinforced, right? The concept of heaven and hell, right? So here, Al-Ghazali emphasized the importance of the context of spiritual purification. Um, Spiritual purification is the soul's ultimate salvation. To attain the eternal bliss in the afterlife, our soul has to be purified. How do we purify our soul? Following a righteous path. Okay, this includes lots of the ritualistic things that we are aware of. Definitely repentance from sin, upholding moral integrity. So that is the considered as righteous path. And definitely, we definitely have to maintain a deep faith in Allah. Right, connect ourselves to the highest being, right, our Creator. Okay, so here, spiritual purification involves cleansing of the soul from the worldly desires, sins, as well as distraction. In the world, there are lots of distraction, and that we might go astray and perform certain types of sins, for example. So that's require us to purify again and again, purify the soul, and the spiritual purification is definitely pertinent means for us to attain the moral integrity, and definitely very important to destine or to put up where do we go after life, right? Whether we want to be punished or we want to be given the right kind of reinforcement. Okay, so here, these are the categorization, three primary categorization or three primary stages of the soul. Nafsul Mutma'innah, the highest one, the tranquil soul. Nafsul Lawamah, the self-reproaching soul. And Nafsul Amara, the commanding soul. Okay.
Doctor?
Yeah.
We have passed 4 minutes.
Okay. I think this concept is very very well known to all participants. All right, but hopefully I am able to. These are all the description of the Nafsul Mutma'innah, Lawamah, as well as Amara. All right, and then a little bit on the purification of the soul, the process, whereby Al-Ghazali placed a strong emphasis on knowledge. Right, and that is very, very important in order for us to be able to do this soul purification. All right, so I will submit these slides, and inshallah all participants will be able to do a bit of a reading based on the slides. Right, you can search for information with regards to the spiritual insight, the ma'rifah, the purification of the soul, tazkiyah, and so on and so forth. So I am so sorry for going over the time. Thank you so much for listening. And that's all from me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.